Shall we start? Might as well start with a nice win for the Stony Brook Seawolves to finish off the season, Ken. They finally did face Albany at the end of the season, and as Chuck Briori mentioned, often they do. The last game of the season is often against Albany, and the Seawolves had very little trouble with the Great Danes, rolling over them, but it still leaves a lot of question marks for the offseason. Chuck Briori was quoted as saying that sets us up nicely for the offseason, but doesn't. And we talked about this last week. The future of Chuck Briori, whether anybody openly admits it, just based on how much time is left on his contract, is in question.
Yeah, a big win, obviously, for him and the Seawolves, not only for bragging rights, that Golden Apple Trophy in play, of course, but as he said as well, it's a game that allows you to move forward correctly into next season. And there is a lot of unknowns. For sure, for the moment, Briori still has another season left on his contract. So for the time being, of course, he still is. And as of right now, no indication from the higher-ups that any changes are going to occur, that he'll enter next season as head coach for the Seawolves. But as you said, a lot of questions. A lot of key players on this team graduating. Tykel Fields, probably the biggest quarterback, gone now after finishing up his graduate season. Kyle Nunez as well on the offensive line. Brandon Lopez as well. Two of them, two key members of that O-line that was really good at protecting and leading the ground game this season. They're graduating as well. So some big pieces that are exiting this team. But for one day, I think it was a pretty good day to be Seawolf. There was a lot of happiness, a lot of joy to go around. A game the Seawolves should have won. They won, and won convincingly as well. Their best performance of the season.
Final score was 36-14, and the Seawolves dominated all the way. They were up 10-0 at the end of one, 19-0 at the end of two, and Albany didn't get on the board until the third quarter. But most importantly, it was a well-executed game for the Seawolves because they stuck to their game plan, and it worked brilliantly for them. Season high, 321 yards on the ground, fourth most in a game by a team in the CAA this season, and it's the most for the Seawolves since they rushed for 336 yards as a team on September 28, 2019, the last full season they had against Rhode Island. So, worked out perfectly for the Seawolves in that everybody who was supposed to do something in the game did it. But the next question remains, is they did against a team like Albany, who was having a down year, didn't win their first game until 2 weeks ago. They came in with a 2-game winning streak, and those are the only 2 wins they had all year. So, Albany is dealing with some issues on their own, but the Seawolves, they're at an impasse because, as we said, with 1 year, the whole lame duck thing. Now, of course, it varies according to policy. Brian Cashman, for example, with the Yankees, has 1 year left on his contract, but it hasn't meant anything in the past. In other words, they eventually do make a deal, okay? But they're not the Yankees, the Seawolves. This is a different animal altogether, and football's a different animal than baseball. The football coach has to recruit, as we said, and if you're a kid coming out of high school, you want to make sure the coach you play for is the same one when you graduate. And can you, as a high school senior, depend on that with Stony Brook right now?
Right, and looking at this team, like yesterday's game showed, if you're someone who really excels on the ground game, then you're going to thrive in the Seawolves football program. He said 321 yards on the ground, which was of their most this season, most in a long time. And for them, we saw Tyson Lawton, who's a redshirt sophomore, and another underclassman as well, and Roland Dempster, a redshirt freshman, get his big break, his big star showing. Both of them rushing for over 100 yards in the game. Dempster led the way with 160 yards on the ground, only on 19 carries as well. So, the process of this team, where this team's strengths are, they haven't changed in a long time. And it's still the ground game that looks like is going to be the focus heading into next season as well. especially, again, knowing that you have Tyson Lawton returning. He finished the season with 1,000 total yards on both on the ground and over the air. That's combined. And
that's a big plus.
It is. And another underclassman in Roland Dempster coming back as well, obviously with 3 years left in his eligibility. So, the ground game doesn't look like it's going away. So that's definitely something I think coach and the team's going to keep in mind when looking for their next quarterback.
As a quarterback, if you are, again, a high school senior, you like that or should like that. If maybe you like to throw the ball all the time and don't like to hand it off, well, if you think that way, then maybe you need to readjust your perspective on things, because having a good running game, as many a good quarterback will tell you, is very important to balance the offense so they don't load up the secondary on you. So part of the balance for the Seawolves is there. Big, important piece is there. But there is a big void right now because Tykewell Fields is graduating, but they need somebody significantly better than Tykewell Fields if they're going to make a run at the top of the CAA or get back into the FCS championship. Because, he did improve. He did improve. He was good. He was within his ability. He was not. No one in the NFL is going to give him a look. He took care of the ball, reduced his mistakes, and gave the Seawolves a chance. So that was within his abilities, and he stayed with himself and did a good job of it. And that's why I have a lot of respect for the job he did. That's not a problem. The problem is you have to take that skill to another level, and the Seawolves have anybody in the pipeline who can do that.
Agreed. And that's the interesting part, too, looking at who is on tap as of now. First off, leading under Tykewell Fields would be Josh Salmon, which as of now I think would be, the front runner for the QB1 position next season. He'll be a redshirt senior, so only 1 year of eligibility should he choose to return. Obviously, he played in a couple games at quarterback already, played in 5 of them this year as well. He didn't really get too much time to showcase what he could do. To finish the season going a measly 2 for 4, 27 yards total, but he did throw a 21-yard pass as well as an interception as well in that Fordham game. But you would think someone like him would be the front runner because, for as we've seen so far, hasn't done much, of course, but he's a guy who I think is balanced in the run as well as passing similar week to Fields. After him, there's another redshirt junior as well, and Danny Sanchez, who's more of the mobile quarterback. But I think in terms of guys who you're describing who are really going to be able to present a passing game and a primary passing role at that, you got to look at a freshman in Darren Bryden, who the team just picked up this last signing process. And he's the guy who led Bloomingfield High School, led the state of Connecticut over 3,300 passing yards and 42 touchdowns as a junior. So he's a guy who really didn't spend too much time on the ground game because he was learning to rock over the air, finishing his high school career of over 7,300 passing yards, 98 passing touchdowns.
Got to get him in there. That's what they need. He doesn't necessarily have to throw like that because he does have running backs. But the fact that he has an arm and the ability to take over an offense and keep a secondary honest, that's good. That's what the Seawolves have not had the past couple of years. And I think it's hurt them, and that's just not the way football's being played now. You can't do, as you said on last week's show, this ground chuck was 10 years ago.
Right.
Okay, when you had all the Hanson winners on your team and you dominated offensively primarily with your running game. First of all, you did have a decent quarterback, which offset that, but you're going to have to adjust your game to the way it's being played right now, and FCS football is not played like that. You have to air it out.
Agreed. And we take a look at the two teams who did advance in the FCS postseason, that being number 3 JMU and number 5 Villanova. There is a couple of similarities on that in statistically both rushing and passing, where you see Villanova was a very run-heavy team like the Seawolves, but they also are one of the better passing teams as well, with JMU obviously finishing with the best passing stats, over 276 yards over the year, 67% completion percentage, 245 completions overall. Villanova was right there too, averaging 211 yards over the year, which was fourth best in the conference. So it goes back again to that balance of having a strong run game and pass game that's going to make you a playoff team, as opposed to just looking at Stony Brook this season. We know how great their run game was. They finished third with 176 rushing yards per game overall this season, but passing-wise, they were a little bit better than William & Mary with 167 passing yards per game, which is 11th in the conference. So that archetype that I described, and someone that archetype of Darren Bryden, who's very pass heavy, or even guys like Danny Sanchez and Josh Zammit. Danny Sanchez, especially the more mobile guy. Zammit probably a balance of the two. That's going to be, I think, instrumental is finding that right archetype for this team going forward, because you're going to have a strong run game. This team usually has a really good offensive line. Well, good offensive line. So with really good offensive line men leading the charge. But, it's the quarterback position with Fields, and even going back to Joe Carbone, it was a question mark. And even after they left, it still left some things to be desired. So it's going to be really fun this offseason, seeing which one of those three really step up. Because, unlike when Carbone graduated, where you pretty much knew it was Fields' position to lose, you don't really know who's going to be the next quarterback to step up next season.
Well, the final standings of the CAA, well, first of all, they are, as we expected, James Madison and Villanova at the top at 7-1, Elon sneaking into third at 5-3, bunch of 4-4s, including Stony Brook. But Rhode Island, Maine, Richmond, and William & Mary joined Stony Brook at 4-4. Delaware, Towson 3-5, New Hampshire 2-6, and Albany 1-7. But what does that tell you? Competitive balance, number one. James Madison is leaving, number two. And a CAA that's ripe for the taking if you can get your passing game going, because the best passing team in the conference is now gone.
Best team in the conference, I'd say, is now gone.
Yeah.
Not just
even though Villanova technically won the automatic qualifier.
Yeah. But I think just overall as a team, it's JMU's usually at the top year in and year out. They were the only team to hit 50 touchdowns overall as an offense this season.
There you go.
Yeah.
And they both had buys in the tournament. The top two.
Right.
See, the beauty of the CAA football is it's what Stony Brook wants to be and what the rest of the CAA wants to be in terms of sending teams to the NCAA tournament. A football conference sending more than one team to the tournament is pretty good. It means you're among the top conferences in that subdivision. The problem is not, of course, we keep saying this is not the case in basketball. CAA only sends one team usually. Occasionally they'll send a second one. And that's why Stony Brook doesn't want to get into the CAA, because it's a tougher, more competitive conference, but there is no reward for it. Now, as far as football is concerned, they're comfortable where they are. I don't see them moving anywhere. One, America East doesn't have football. And that's why so many America East schools are in the CAA. New Hampshire, Albany, Maine, and Stony Brook. So, half the America East is in the CAA for football. So, the big thing, I think, is you have to address the quarterback situation. But we haven't even talked about the defense.
Yeah, the defense for this program, I thought for the most part they were pretty good. They kept the Seawolves in a lot of games, I thought, this season, especially when the offense was lacking. And I think when you look back at the offense, too, the thing I think the Seals are going to kick themselves over the most are the winnable games. Because there were 3 games in there that the Seawolves were in for a long time because the defense was making stops, because the defense was forcing turnovers, because the defense was, as I said, playing well, getting those 3 and outs, or forcing their team to punt. This defense overall was pretty good. They get fourth best average points allowed per game with just under 23. And they allowed 33 touchdowns overall, which is good for the fifth best ranking overall. So, and they're a team that they're a defense that I thought was really strong, and he has some key pieces of leaving there too, but not as big as a concern because I think of that leadership and how good the defense was at the start of the season, how it continued to get better over time. Of course, that Oregon game was standing.
You bring up an excellent point, though, because if your defense is so good that you can say you can pencil in 3 extra wins, 3 extra wins puts you up with James Madison and Villanova. That puts you at 7-1. So it all falls back on the quarterback yet again because your defense is more than adequate. It's now your offense who has to produce in order to avoid overworking the defense. I mean, Seawolves' defense is not good enough they can ride it exclusively. Exactly. But on the other hand, nobody else in the CAA has a defense like that either.
Yeah. And the thing, too, is not necessarily just passing, like the quarterback. Obviously, of course, it's big, but receiving-wise as well, I thought it really took the entirety of the season for the Seawolves to find that primary wideout to step up. And it did end up being Sean Harris Jr., and it makes a lot of sense knowing he comes from Archbishop Stepinac, played alongside Tykel Fields in high school for a season. So, of course, having, that chemistry, that previous relationship was a big factor. He ended up being a top 10 receiver in the conference, at least in terms of reception yards, with 586 on the season, but he only had 3 passing touchdowns. And, you look at how touchdowns were scored for this team, and more often than not, it was coming on the ground, coming off the hands of the feet of Tyson Lawton, who finished with 11, 10 of those coming from the ground.
So, we've spent a lot of time on football. We're not going to be hearing a lot more from them unless there are signings over the offseason. Yeah. But they were respectable and bouncing back from a year that was an absolute mess. 4-4 in conference, 5-6 overall, and beat Albany. So, not too bad, but there's still a lot more work to be done. Now, another team that, while we were busy concentrating on football, does something that's unprecedented. Well, actually, I'm not so sure. Because, again, the baseball team on the 2012 College World Series run beat some power conference teams, but neither basketball team ever beat 2 power conference teams in a row. Wisconsin and Rutgers, who are both members of the Big Ten, they had only one other Big Ten victory in their entire existence at D1. And then they do 2 in a row. You think this team's for real?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone I think knew that Seawolves women's basketball program was legit. That's why they were ranked the top program in the preseason coaches poll. A lot of folks buy into the Seawolves, their system. The players, especially the ones returning, like Anastasia Warren, like India Pagan, they know the talent for this team. I think the only questions would have been, how is this team going to play under a new coach with Coach McCombs leaving? And Coach Langford has filled in very nicely and implemented her system, which has really seen a further rise in usage in the guards, and they have been dominating. A 5-0 start, Seawolves' best in program history. No coach has gotten off to a 5-0 start.
Got to correct myself.
Seawolves head coach.
They didn't beat Wisconsin, they beat St. John's. Big East. Big East and Big Ten, back to back. Okay. Yeah. Where I got this Wisconsin on the road, I was probably thinking of another team, one of our other teams. But the important thing here is that, once again, the only other power conference win I think they had was against St. John's, like in their second year.
I remember Penn State, they beat them a couple of years ago, back in 2019.
So that would be Big Ten.
Yeah.
So, but still, neither of these teams in power conference teams are the standard right now. I mean, St. John's has to deal with UConn. They're back in the Big East, and Rutgers has its own issues. But although Rutgers men are doing pretty well under Steve Peichel once again, but the important thing here is that an America East team, no matter how good it is not supposed to beat a power conference team, particularly 2 in a row.
Agreed. And of course, remember going into that game, focused on winning against Rutgers first, back on Tuesday, the 16th. That was when we talked about where we said that this Rutgers defense is better than Stony Brook's. And for Stony Brook offense, which scored 80 points in his first 2 games and was averaging over 70 through his first 3, was one where we knew they weren't going to reach those marks. And, left to question. We know the offense is going to bring it, but what is this team going to do defensively? And will it be enough to stop the Scarlet Knights? And the answer was yes, because the Seals used a real gritty defensive effort to get that big win. They held Rutgers to 44 points on 26% shooting from the field, including only 21% from 3, as I thought, their best strength was defense because they forced a lot of turnovers and turned 22 points off turnovers in order to secure the 53-44 victory.
The one thing that's impressed me over the past couple of years with this team has been its athleticism.
Oh, yes.
The athletic ability of this team is better than what I've seen out of this team in many, many years, if ever. This could very well be the best.
Yeah, it gets better, I think, by year, and that's crazy when you consider, again, some of the tremendous athletes, like Corey Walker a few years ago, of course, Jerome Matthews, Shorty Johnson, who's probably the fastest player, this program has seen because, of her 5'1" height, still her ability to beat so many defenders in spite of that inside the paint. It was absolutely remarkable. Of course, KK Hilaire a couple seasons ago, and now seeing these guards step up like Annie Warren, Gigi Gonzalez, Erlet Scott in particular. Those 3 I thought were the focal points for the past couple of Seawolves victories. They really took over to push the tempo with their athleticism and speed. And the best part is they do it both inside and outside the paint. Gonzalez knocked down a 3 off the glass to beat the buzzer that I thought really gave the Seawolves that push they needed to stay ahead of Rutgers at the end of that third quarter. And Warren, for example, just followed that up, scoring 10 points in the fourth and knocking down 3 3-point shots to secure that victory.
So, we do have the Seawolves women taking on Columbia at Columbia on Wednesday. A 1 p.m. start. It is the day before Thanksgiving. And then St. Francis of Brooklyn the following Sunday, which is Sunday after Thanksgiving. That will be, of course, on WSB and at the Allen Federal Credit Union Arena. They go to Fordham on the following Thursday. Then Marist, the Red Foxes, another MAC team, same conference as Iona. Penn, as we were saying, not Penn State, just Penn, an Ivy League team. And they go to Hofstra, and then at the end of December, right after Christmas, Thursday after Christmas, they will visit New Jersey Institute of Technology in the first America East matchup. So,
and you hear those teams, they're listing off, and I feel like for the Seawolves now, especially in the position they're at, where they're already 5-0, they're definitely thinking, how far can we keep this going? It's not their primary thought. When they step on the court, they're not thinking we got to make it 6-0 on the season, 7-0, etc. But in the back of their minds, they're definitely thinking, what team is going to deliver enough to stop us? What team is really going to show what our weakness is? And just on paper, upsets happen. And again, on paper, it doesn't tell you the story in any sport, obviously. But on paper, as you said, it really doesn't feel like that this winning streak is ending anytime soon. And again, let's look back at the game against Iona yesterday. The Seawolves team, this one here, they relied heavily on the goal. Well, Erlet Scott was a big component in the victory, but Leah Mari Wool, I thought, really stepped up as well. The forward led the way with 16 points inside, some of it inside, some of it being 3-point shooting, especially with a clutch 3-pointer with 14 seconds to go. And that was I thought, a more tightly contested game than the Rutgers game, which I think would be surprising because on paper you'd think it'd be the opposite. But the Seawolves were able to still shoot 33, 43, and 66% on the field, while holding the Gales to 327, 27% and 50% free throw shooting. So, for the Seawolves team so far, you really don't see a weakness, because even when they're not averaging 80 points a game like to start the season, they're still doing enough defensively to pester you on the wing, pester you inside the post, force turnovers, and capitalize on it. As I said before, scoring 22 points off turnovers against Rutgers in that win earlier this week.
Speaking of pests, the NJIT Highlanders have been a pest to the Seawolves in every sport they face them in. And that's who they open against. And that is on the road, no less. That's there. And then they get Hartford, and then they go to UMBC. But right now, first off, this poll that was taken at the beginning of the season, the coaches poll, it wasn't a really tight, top 3 or something like that. Stony Brook right now is obviously the strongest team in the America East. Is Maine still there? Sure. I mean, are there teams that can present a threat to the Seawolves on a given night? Certainly.
Hartford's done in the past a much worse roster. They managed to pull an upset off the Seawolves.
Hartford, unfortunately, we all know the story with them. Hartford may, dig deep and give the Seawolves a hard time, but Hartford, in the early days when when Stony Brook first joined the America East, Hartford was notorious for being a thorn in the Seawolves' side. Seawolves got to the final a couple of times, and guess who stopped them? So Hartford, especially under Jen Rosati, was a really good women's program and consistently was at the top of the America East. Now, the internal affairs of Hartford I'm not privy to, because I'm not as close to them as I am, obviously, at Stony Brook, but they, as everybody should know by now, are downgrading their athletic programs to Division III, which means that the athletes who have not transferred out yet are kind of in a lame duck situation. And it really is not the most optimal situation for an athlete to be in, that your program is basically falling down from around you. And, the only thing that's keeping you in there is that you haven't found a place to go yet.
Right. And you got to think, though, that, maybe serve some extra motivation, especially in conference play, to go out, with a bang. So far, 0-4 overall. And one loss I want to highlight is let me find it again, was an 85-42 loss to Penn, who the Seals will be playing later this season. So just to give you an idea there of, what's going to be in store, two highly explosive offenses there. But yeah, as you said, for the Seawolves, they're 5-0, or tapped to be amongst the best. NGIT, actually, the only other team with 3 wins or more. They have the second best record in the conference at 3-2. Maine is 2-3. The rest of the conference is 2-2, 1-3, or winless like Hartford. So Seawolves, I think, have the best showing so far. I think they're going to continue to have the best showing. And again, as long as that offense stays hot, as long as those pieces keep being reliable, it's going to be a long time before we see the Seawolves start to show any weakness.
Well, there could be some people in the America East crowing about how the Seawolves' non-conference schedule, while it isn't exactly a cakewalk, doesn't have a Kansas in there, like Kansas. It doesn't have a UConn in there, okay. Doesn't have a top 10 school, not even has a ranked school in there. So maybe they pad the record a little bit. But as we know, mid-major conferences like the America East, the overall record means nothing. You could go 0-10. Look what UMBC volleyball did. You go 0-10 in your first 10 games and then go 16-0 in the America East. It really doesn't matter. What matters is whether you win the tournament, and that's why we've had some underdogs sneak in there and stuff like that. But the fact is that it's a good tune-up. It gets the Seawolves used to playing together and, executing their game plan and not having too many threats to it, whether they're taken out of it. But the bottom line is that you don't see too many obstacles in this women's schedule. I don't want to get too optimistic. I am saying, though, that there are no automatic losses in there. I don't know about automatic wins, but definitely there's no Kansas in there. Because now we have to shift to the men.
Yeah, I was going to say, shifting there, you kind of knew what you were expecting. But even then, you had to be optimistic that they played hard. It was tight through the first half. But, unlike that Stony Brook Rutgers game where the Seawolves really took control in the second half, it went the opposite way, where Kansas was able to really, start producing offensively. And we saw, honestly, the greatness of Oche Agbaji, the nation's leading scorer, 15 points in the second half, shooting 10 of 19, including 4 3-pointers. And that was ultimately the game changer there, as Kansas was able to beat Stony Brook 88-59.
Well, the funny thing is that in the first half, the Seawolves actually shot pretty well, especially in the early going first 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, Kansas defense started to wake up.
Yeah, exactly.
The shooting percentage started going down.
Yeah, they were up 9-2 through the first several minutes of that contest. It was the different Seawolves stepping up to lead the team. They didn't really turn to one guy for the scoring. They had 9 different scorers, I believe, in this contest. Seals did. So there was really no one role player they were, turning to get scores. But the difference maker again was that X factor, game changer player. And defensively as well, it didn't help in that first half that even though Kansas wasn't scoring early, they still ended the first half shooting 53%, 17 of 32 overall, which kind of offsets those 6 3-pointers Stony Brook made in that first half.
The only thing I don't like about this schedule, yes, 2 very tough programs and 2 very tough losses to George Mason and Kansas. The problem I have is those are the only 2 games they've played so far. They will, of course, be starting off the Stony Brook Classic against Sacred Heart tomorrow, 6:31 p.m., 6:15 start in USB. And then they will take on Fairfield at Fairfield day before Thanksgiving on Wednesday, 2 p.m. start. And then they're back in business. And this is where we run into trouble as broadcasters because they're going to be at Yale, but since the women are at home, we're going to be doing the women's home game. So you got American, you got Wagner, you got Hofstra, Bryant, Central Connecticut State, and then you got St. Peter's all before Christmas, and that's a pretty cramped schedule, especially in December. That's where they're making it up. Then you got Florida, a ranked team, second-ranked team they'll face all year, but then Farmingdale right after that, and their American East schedule starts January 2nd with Hartford. So, other than Florida, where they're making some money off the deal as well, we go down to Gainesville, winnable games, and also shows where you stand. When you're going up against the Hofstra, and Hofstra is up against high expectations. They're expected to finish high in the CAA. They're looking pretty good. I'm circling that date personally as a barometer to see what kind of program we have this year.
Agreed, and that's a team, too, that I think really excels on both ends of the court. Obviously, inside, they look pretty good as well. They got some bigs, which I don't think Seawolves necessarily have. The Seawolves are really training more towards that outside shooting, which was something I thought would work in their favor. And although they haven't won, it's been nice to see, I think, more reliance and success on the 3-point shooting, although it is at 28%, and you want to see that at least at 30%, because they're shooting 35% as a whole as a team. But yeah, you're right. That Hofstra team, they're real good because they could really get down low, really push defenders, really bump their way down inside in the paint towards the basket and get some easy looks that way.
Yeah, and I think that they dominated the Seawolves last year and 2 years ago. Again, the whole COVID thing. I'm trying to remember, we were on the road against Hofstra. Was that 2019 or 2020? And well, they got the entire 2019-20 season in because the pandemic didn't hit till afterward.
Right.
Of course, yes, the tournament got stopped, but the regular season they got in. But the season after that is what I'm thinking about. What would they do? But Hofstra has won the last few matchups, and I mean, it's not going to be like 35 years ago where Seawolves miraculously pulled one out. But I think this Seawolves team is more competitive and can give Hofstra a run for its money, particularly on its home court.
And they're going to need the three-point shooting as well, because Hofstra is a team that, besides, of course, battling inside, they love to get their guys shooting threes. They lead the CAA so far, 45 three-pointers made, 35% so far through their first 4 games.
So we rejoin them. A game against Sacred Heart. They have a long history against them as well, even though they don't share a conference. So, again, looking forward to basketball coming up this season. Now we got to look at hockey. Hockey, Jake Bazil and I did the game on Friday, and I was not surprised by the performance because they had shown everybody that they're capable of, first of all, scoring like 36 goals on Syracuse. But the most important thing here is that they really haven't, lost their pace at all. Okay? The only seriously challenging games they've had were, of course, getting swept at Liberty, but scoring 17 goals against Syracuse. Okay, 15 against Drexel. But Drexel did bounce back today. Yesterday, rather. We were on Friday. They beat them 9-2. Drexel in Philadelphia, on the other hand, they were able to hold the Seals down to 4 goals. That I find very interesting because I didn't think they had it in them. I thought this was going to be a romp just like Syracuse was.
Yeah, I think part of the issue, too, for that Saturday game is what Drexel was struggling with on Friday. They really retooled and revamped Saturday. So you saw them, I thought, play more aggressive, start a matchup, bite back against the Seawolves, who, play so aggressive on the boards. That led to them getting more possessions on the puck. But another factor that hurt Seawolves as well is they suffered by being on the penalty kill a whole lot. They on Friday's game, they were undermanned 8 times, and although they didn't surrender a goal on any of those attempts, they still, you're down on the penalty kill 8 times during the game. You're already undermanned on an average of about 4 minutes per every period, and it didn't bite them on Friday when you scored 9 goals. But Saturday, when the offense wasn't really clicking, that's when Drexel took advantage, got 2 or 3 goals on the power play.
The one thing that I noticed on Friday was that Charles Peck was quiet. And maybe when the rest of the team scores 9 goals, you can afford to be. But you have to wonder, how quiet was he on Saturday as well? And whether or not there were things that we didn't really pay much attention to because the rest of the team was doing so well that might have affected them.
Yeah, we scored 1 goal in Saturday's contest. That was the first one for Stony Brook to tie the match at 1. But as you're saying, for a guy who's usually averaging a hat trick per game, you only having 2 or 3 on the weekend. I don't think Friday, again, it matters when you have so many different guys stepping up on offensively scoring for you. But yeah, Saturday, they really could have used a guy like him, a reliable shooter they could turn to, especially when you're trailing the whole game like they were in Saturday's contest.
So they continue on. They're done for Thanksgiving, but they will be back in action on the road the following weekend at Delaware, and then that's it. The fall semester's over for them. and they're not back in action until January 8th when they take on Delaware again. But it's going to be kind of a home and home because they're away next weekend, and then when they return to action in January, they'll be home for both games. So, but ball against Delaware. Delaware, of course, is in their division.
Yeah.
But
and the good news for the team too as well, it's their first loss against an ESCHL opponent, in that conference. So, or rather in that division of the conference. So, you get down a little bit, but they're still 9-1-0 on the season against ESCHL opponents. They're ahead of the standings by 8 points with URI losing in yesterday's game. They're 12-3-1 overall on the season. So, overall, it's been a really great effort from them, and they have one of the most lethal offenses in the ACHA.
And while it might have faltered a little bit yesterday, they still continue to roll. And yes, those 17 goals they scored on Syracuse a couple of weeks ago, plus the 16, so that adds up to 33. And the 9 goals they scored on Drexel are still impressive numbers. And Delaware still has their work cut out as they host Stony Brook next weekend. So, 10:42 and 52 seconds here on the sports section. Time to remind everyone that we are still in the middle of Radiothon. That means semi-annual fundraiser. And by now, if you've been listening to Stony Brook Seawolves sports, either games or the sports section, you know that. You have to know that. So I'm wondering, where are the pledges? And again, you're not going away empty-handed. You are getting something good. We're starting with a $35 donation where you can get a Seawolves mug, a Seawolves mask, or a Seawolves beanie. The important thing, a WUSB beanie, I should say, because they gave away Seawolves beanies yesterday at the football game. First 1,000 spectators got one from Island Federal Credit Union. That's very nice of them. But that's nice if you're a Seawolves fan. But if you're not one of those first 1,000, what are you going to wear outside in February when lacrosse kicks in? Or on the way over to Island Federal Credit Union Arena to watch a basketball game? Whatever you're doing, okay, and I keep saying this, you're rocking the red. Everybody knows you're rocking the red. But you got to rock the WUSB swag as well. And the only way to get one is to make a pledge to Radiothon. So please do. If you're listening online, it's WUSB.FM. If you are listening over the air, you can still go to WUSB.FM and pledge online. Or make a call. 631-632-6901. It'll take a message. 631-632-WUSB likewise. But any way you do it, it's a way to show your support, not just for the Seawolves, but for the people who bring the Seawolves to you and have been doing it since we went FM over 40 years ago. So, please, don't do it for me. Do it for yourself. Do a good turn for the Seawolves athletic programs. And let's face it, if you're contributing big amounts of money to new scoreboards and stuff like that, you can spare a couple of bucks to get a Seawolves hat or Stony Brook WUSB hat. Okay, Seawolves hats, go get those. You can get those through StonyBrookAthletics.com. But you can only get WUSB stuff from WUSB. And show your support. So, 10:45 and 56 seconds. Ken, what else is on the agenda for athletics here? Because we've pretty much covered the basketball programs. What's left?
Just to wrap it up, just some volleyball action. And that's pretty much it. With volleyball, of course, obviously losing in the semifinals of the Americas Conference, that officially put the end of fall sports, at least fall sports coverage on the station. But for the most part, the end of fall sports for the Seawolves, as now the attention really turns towards basketball and obviously hockey for us, but basketball for the next couple months until the spring season starts and you start seeing baseball, softball, lacrosse, etc. But yeah, the volleyball team, they did go down to top-ranked, undefeated UMBC, the eventual conference champs for the second straight season, UMBC Retrievers. But, they left it all out there on the court. They won the first set and actually were leading 2-1, but ultimately UMBC was able to stack up some key runs, especially in that fourth, use a 5-0 run, go up 22-16, take that set, and force a fifth set to happen. And that fifth set, it was a nail-biter. They were leading 14-2, but Seawolves scored 3 straight points to go up 15-4 and could have won, but an untimely service error tied up the match. And when you give the Retrievers an opening, they're going to take it. They ultimately took that fifth set 17-15. Of course, went on to win it all. But, for the Seawolves, I thought they had a great showing, one of their best on the season. And now you look towards the future. We talked about for football, some key players leaving. For the Seawolves, none bigger, ironically, than the 5'2" Keani Kerstetter, the libero. They're probably the greatest defensive specialist in program history, leaving with the most digs in program history. She's graduating. You have another offensive. First Kerstetter, over 1,780 digs in her career for the top spot in program history. You see Eni Omalewa, senior mid-blocker, a really keystone part of that offense, graduating as well as a couple other seniors in Haley Barta and Paige Yeager. So this offense is going to have a new look next season. And you really want to see players like Sabrina Patricello, Maya DeLong, and Tori Henry continue to step up.
Now, we talked about Chuck Priori saying it's nice to end the season on a good note, beating Albany, but it's even nicer that if you can't go all the way, to end the season on a note like taking it to a team that has run roughshod over the entire conference, the entire regular season, and taking them to full 5 sets, because I don't think they were expecting that. I thought, yes, the Seawolves have been competitive, but the season up until then for UMBC was a cakewalk.
Yeah, exactly. UMBC really wasn't stressing too much. And even in the prior contest, I believe there were both 3-1 victories in favor of the Retrievers. They were pretty much dominated solely by UMBC throughout the regular season. So, I thought the Seals really learned. And really what was a big factor was that, they had multiple outlets they could turn to for scoring. Leonie Coons, of course, leading the way, 17 kills and 13 digs as well for her 8th double-double of the season. Eni Omalewa, of course, wrapping it up with a career high 15 kills from the middle and 4 blocks. And that was another thing, too, is this was a team that really didn't get a lot of blocks in the regular season. They had 8 blocks, which, if that's not the most, it's definitely among the most blocks they've had during a game this season. And although it wasn't as much as the Retrievers' 12, it goes to show that, that area that I think they really need to refine as they move forward next season. It shows that, that potential was there, and they were able to, at least in that game, for the most part, key in on that issue and really not have it be too much of a problem. But neither team hit above 20%, which is a credit to the Seawolves defense. And it was I thought with just how close it was, it led to a lot of errors. Both teams finished with over 30 errors in the contest. But, for the Seawolves, they look good. And as you said, you can't win, of course, not going all the way, but, that's the way you want to go out if you're a team that's going to go out.